happy solstice, summer solstice, happy Pride, and happy Father's Day. We're so glad you made it, and we've got quite a treat for you today. One of our most special guests is back again. It's going to provide a legislative update, which includes, as you may have seen, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He's gonna lay it all out there for us, and we appreciate that and his honesty. So this is live on Zoom, live streaming to YouTube. And before I introduce Representative Smith, a few quick reminders. Be sure to join us on Meetup if you haven't already. There you'll have access to the Zoom login, so you can join us live for these events. You may be watching it on YouTube, or you may be watching it on video afterwards. And we'd love for you to be here live if it's convenient for you. If not, we're glad to put it out there on YouTube for you. In just a few short months, we'll be back in person for these educational events. We're back in person for some of our social events and a little bit of our activism and volunteering and stuff, but we'll get these events back into the University Club in Winter Park, hopefully in September. That's the plan right now, and it's still coming together. Join Meetup to get that information as soon as it's available, and you can do that at meetup.com/CFL Freethought. And once you've joined there, be sure to RSVP for coming events and put them on your calendar. Meetup does a great job of reminding you, perhaps too much sometimes, of stuff coming up, but if you RSVP, you won't miss it. Today's event is part of our recurring educational series. You can find all of our past educational events and follow us on YouTube at youtube.com/CFL Freethought. And if you prefer to hear about those events via monthly emails, go to tinyurl.com/CFFC newsletter. Give us your email address and any other contact information you'd like, and we promise to keep you in the loop. Of course, we hope you're already following us on Facebook at CFL Freethought. And if you're with us today in the Zoom meeting, you can find the chat option available at the bottom of your screen on your computer. If you're on a mobile device, just tap the screen and that should appear as an option. Chat's where we want you to ask questions today, so put those there and we'll get to as many as we can. Also, your microphone will be kept on mute until the end of the presentation, and Q&A, we'll open the mics up after we get done. That way you don't interrupt the presentation. If you want to keep your camera on, that's absolutely fine, but please avoid any visual distractions. Now, in this event, eye rolling, head shaking, and face palming are all fair game. You're not going to get gigged for that, but we don't want anything that's too distracting from the video, but we'd love to see your smiling faces, at least from here up. And by the way, WTF means welcome to Florida. Does not mean what you think it means. So let's go ahead and get started. So I don't need to sell the credentials of today's guest for you, but I want to mention just a couple of things of note. His full bio that they provided is in the notes for the Facebook event and the YouTube event, as well as Meetup. But I want to say that in 2016, Representative Smith became Florida's first openly LGBTQ Latinx state lawmaker just 5 months after the tragedy at Pulse nightclub. He was reelected in 2018 and 2020, and in both cases, he was endorsed on those two races by the Freethought Equality Fund. And for those of you who don't know of that organization, we'll drop a link into to the Center for Freethought Equality into the chat so you can check that out. You can find them at freethought-equality.org. It's a great organization. It really focuses on secular lawmakers and advocating for their voices in government. And that's what we want. Now, we can't, as a local nonprofit, advocate for candidates, but we can point you to that as a resource. And I just want to point out that Carlos was both times in 18 and 20 endorsed by that organization. He serves all Floridians from his District 49 seat, which includes East Orlando and parts of Orange County. He lives in Union Park with his husband, Jerick Mediavilla, an educator from Puerto Rico. He's worked tirelessly for Central Florida, advocating for civil rights, cannabis reform, debt-free college, animal welfare, mental health, and gun safety. He was a critical voice when Pulse happened, and he has vowed to hold elected officials accountable as much as he can as a lawmaker for their actions, and most of all for the promises that they made to the LGBTQ plus community in the wake of Pulse. I want to welcome Florida's only agnostic elected official that dares to proclaim it publicly, Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, Central Florida Freethought community. It is so good to be here. I am joining you from our condo in Union Park. Actually, just came back into Orlando like an hour ago. We were in Jacksonville last night, my husband and I, celebrating the wedding of one of my colleagues in the House, Representative Angie Nixon. And it was so much fun. We had an amazing time. So we're just kind of still on cloud nine, over that. And I should be a familiar face to many of you because I feel like it's become a bit of a tradition that after session that I come and I talk to the Central Florida Freethought community about the legislative session that that just ended. So I'm happy to be here to discuss that. And I took a look at the notes about today's meeting, so I don't know exactly how much time that I have, but what I was thinking in my mind is I can kind of give you a recap of what the highlights of the legislative session were, the good, bad, and the ugly. And I also really, really enjoy doing less talking and more like hearing from people and answering folks' questions. So I don't know, maybe I'll go for about 15 minutes or so with some session highlights, and then take some questions after that, if that makes sense on the timing. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah, that sounds great. We can do that. That sounds great. We'll even open up the mics after we get rid of the written questions so that we can get those first.
Okay. All right. That's perfect. So unless you were hiding under a cave, you know that this 2021 legislative session was a tough one for working families. This was one of the toughest legislative sessions I've ever seen. In March, I arrived with my House Democratic colleagues with really high hopes. We wanted to work on serious issues that Floridians are struggling with so that we can make a real difference and improve people's lives. Things like fixing Florida's broken unemployment system, being able to expand Medicaid. Finally, that was a goal of ours, especially during COVID, because we know so many folks not only lost their jobs during COVID, but along with that, they lost their health insurance coverage, because we live in a nation where your health insurance coverage is tied to whether or not you have a job. And so we were also, really advocating to support small businesses who have struggled during COVID-19 and shore up some more affordable housing dollars, as we always do, really lifting up working people. But unfortunately, the majority in Tallahassee in the House and Senate decided that they were going to prioritize a lot of petty partisan issues. They were actively all session long looking to try to solve problems that happen in other states. I heard it put this way the other day, and it really made sense to me when someone said that, Florida worked overtime to solve the problems in Portland, Oregon related to rioting during the Black Lives Matter a movement that really was galvanized over the summer. We didn't have any problems here in Florida, and lo and behold, Hate Bill 1 came around, and we spent half of session trying to restrict people's freedom of speech, unfortunately empowering folks who are in their vehicles to have an affirmative defense if they run over a protester who's part of what's defined as a riot, which of course in the bill is loosely defined, just like mob intimidation is very loosely defined. It really criminalizes people for exercising their free speech, and it's very specifically targeted at the Black Lives Movement. The Florida legislature spent an enormous amount of time trying to fix problems that perhaps Arizona might have had with their elections, but we didn't have in Florida. We had a new elections reform bill that really cracks down on the rights of Floridians to vote by mail, with some pretty serious restrictions on the use of drop boxes by supervisors of elections. We saw that this same bill actually even went as far as to cancel vote by mail requests that are existing beyond the 2022 cycle. So, when you order your vote by mail ballots and you check off specifically the elections that you want to request a vote by mail ballot for, most people just check as many boxes are available. They want the 2020 election, the 2022 election, the election after that. Well, this law that we just passed canceled any one who had requested a vote by mail after the 2022 legislative, or not the 2022 legislative session, I'm sorry, the 2022 election. which of course has the effect of disenfranchising some voters. And why did they focus so much on vote by mail? I'll tell you the quiet part out loud, which is that in the 2020 election, even though we had no problems, nothing with the exception of a disgraced former Republican state senator in Miami-Dade, who's been indicted for a election fraud scheme where he recruited a fake third-party candidate and paid him $50,000 to spoil and corrupt the results of an election. With the exception of that, there was no election fraud in Florida. Everything was quite fine. So of course they wanted to completely overhaul the system, because really the quiet part out loud that I was referring to is that in the 2020 cycle, 670,000 more Democrats in Florida voted by mail than Republicans. Now, did we still lose a lot of races? Yes, we did. But we're creeping up on them via vote by mail, which of course is why they wanted to really crack down on that method of voting, because it is now the method where Florida Democrats have a significant advantage. But they will never fess up to that. And of course, the Florida legislature very famously decided to, seek another solution in search of a problem, where they arbitrarily basically passed a ban on transgender students being able to compete in team sports, specifically transgender girls being able to compete in girls sports. Now, so that everyone understands the nature of this issue, Florida, since 2013, has allowed for transgender students to be able to play in athletic programs in public schools. That's because the FHSAA, which a lot of people never really heard of until this bill was filed, that's the Florida High School Athletics Association. They are the entity that essentially, really creates the rules for the road on how school athletic programs run across the state. They created rules in 2013 to create a path for transgender students to be able to participate in team sports. And since then, many have played, and we didn't really hear a lot about it because it's a non-issue and there's never been any problems or complaints with trans kids fully participating in their school and their educational environments, which includes school sports teams. But of course, the Florida legislature spent a lot of time. They spent, I can tell you, much more time trying to humiliate transgender students and expel the students who are currently playing on school sports teams than they spent on lowering your property insurance rates, which are skyrocketing. They spent more time trying to ban trans kids from team sports than they spent trying to fix unemployment or improving school safety or certainly expanding Medicaid, because they did not, or helping small businesses. The point I'm trying to make here is that while you already know my values, and I think it's very, very important, and I know that we share these values, that all students, including LGBTQ students, are treated with dignity and respect. It's not just that we had a difference of opinion in the Florida legislature. Certainly we did, but they squandered the limited amount of time that we had in Tallahassee to fix serious problems in Florida by chasing these issues that are really non-existent in the state of Florida. And unfortunately, Floridians are worse off for it. I want to talk about some bills that you probably already heard of, because they're of particular interest as well to folks who are part of the Central Florida Freethought community. Now, you all know enough about me to know that I identify as agnostic, but I'm particularly certainly a believer in the separation between church and state, and particularly in our public schools. You all know that I understand and believe that it's important that we keep that separation there. So we passed a bill this year that allows for a 2-minute moment of silence at the beginning of the school day. And at the time when they passed the bill, they were telling us how this 2-minute moment of silence was totally not about school prayer. Right? This has nothing to do with school prayer. No. They can do whatever they want with the 2 minutes at the beginning. They can meditate, perhaps engage in some other sort of quiet reflection, which is, I suppose, totally okay. But we certainly have time to do that before the school bell rings and before the day actually starts. So now we have this required 2-minute moment of silence at the beginning of the school day, which is really just opening up the pathway for more prayer in schools. And so I kind of compared that situation to the way the Florida legislature very cleverly does not pray during session. We don't pray during the fact that we're actually lawmaking on the floor of the Florida House. Certainly that would be inappropriate, which is why we pray in the Florida House before they do the quorum call and the roll call vote, which is really the same thing, which is why I typically refrain from participating at all, because I don't think it's appropriate for all of us to be praying, particularly to one denomination, before we do our business of government, because we have a secular government and I'd like to keep it that way. So that bill passed, unfortunately, and Governor DeSantis went to a temple to celebrate signing the moment of silence bill, which is, again, totally not about school prayer, right? So we had that. We had so much during legislative session, and I want to talk about some victories, because listen, these were tough bills. Unfortunately, Hate Bill 1, restricting our freedom of speech and the right to protest peacefully. The elections bill, which I know there's already some lawsuits that have been filed. There were also lawsuits filed against Hate Bill 1 as well. We had this ridiculous social media bill that wasted our time, which was really about them seeking vengeance against Twitter for finally banning Donald Trump in the final days of his administration. So they passed this bill that says that we're gonna punish social media companies if they censor, particularly candidates for public office and elected officials. I think there's an easy solution for that. I don't think that we need a bill to make Twitter and Facebook censor elected officials or candidates less. I think candidates should stop lying and stop pushing misinformation on social media and stop retweeting QAnon. I mean, if you did that, probably wouldn't have a problem with Twitter censoring dangerous content and hateful content. But that's I guess that's just my opinion. A lot of wasted time here, but let's talk about what actually happened that was good. And so, as someone who's a member of the minority party, a Democrat, I am one of 120 members in the Florida House, but only 42 of the 120 of us, only 42 of us are Democrats. So it can be quite the struggle for us to be able to pass laws or get budget items funded in the minority, being how outnumbered we are. But there were some victories that I want to share with you and celebrate them, because I think it's important, and it speaks to how you can still find a way to be effective as a member of the minority party. So I used budget amendments. That was really the way that I tried to not only hold the majority party accountable, but really highlight things that are often overlooked when we put together the budget. And so the first thing that I'm really, really proud of that I want to share with you is funding for the Agency for Persons with Disabilities. So a lot of people don't know this, but in the state of Florida, if you're developmentally disabled, you are eligible, many people are eligible to get quality of life services that really help people with developmental disabilities be able to live and work in their communities rather than in institutionalized care. Those services come in a number of different ways. A lot of times it's with personal care assistants that help individuals with disabilities, or sometimes it's other types of services that help them, really be able to, again, live and work and succeed in their communities with support from these services available through the Agency for Persons with Disabilities. Well, in Florida, there are 22,000 developmentally disabled Floridians who are on a waiting list to get those services. They are eligible for them. They meet the criteria, but they linger on a years-long waiting list because the legislature will not appropriately fund those services. Now, according to the state of Florida, of the 22,000, the state admits this in their own reporting, of the 22,000 Floridians with developmental disabilities on the APD waitlist for services, 40% of them have been on the waitlist for 10 years or more. Think about that. Think about how inherently wrong and unfair it is to keep this vulnerable community waiting for years and years and years and years to get the services that they desperately need. Most of the time, they don't get the services until they basically are in what the state deems to be a state of crisis. What is a state of crisis? Well, a lot of times it's a caregiver or parent of theirs that cares for them passes away, and they no longer have someone to care for them, and the state deems them to be in a state of crisis because they may be on the verge of homelessness, and then they get services after they've been on the wait list for 10 years. So I wanted to describe some of this background because it has been a years-long struggle for me as an advocate to get the state to reduce and eliminate this waiting list. And every year we come back to the Florida legislature, they say that they've reduced the waiting list, but really what they've done is they've funded it just barely enough to take off people from the waiting list that matches the same number of people that have been added to the waiting list since the previous year. So we're never making any progress. This year I made a huge stink about it, as I always do, and I complained that with President Joe Biden's American Rescue dollars that were sent to the state of Florida, namely for a lot of healthcare related costs, that we should be using that money to reduce or eliminate the wait list once and for all and make sure that these folks are enrolled in these lifelong services. They rejected my budget amendment to do that. But after they rejected it, the wheels started turning behind the scenes, and Republicans started actually listening to what we were saying, especially when they were shamed in the media for not accepting these budget amendments. And in the final hours of legislative session, the House mysteriously dumped $80 million into the APD wait list to help reduce the wait list. That doesn't fully fund it. Just to give you an idea, the $80 million that they threw in there on top of the 15 million that was already there, so 95 million, a 95 million investment this year in reducing that wait list, takes 2,000 Floridians off. 2,000 out of 22,000, which is, I mean, we still have a lot of work to do, but it would have been so much less had we not used the budget amendment process to secure that funding. So we're very proud of that work, and I'm actually meeting with the APD director next week to talk more about what we can do to help developmentally disabled Floridians get off the wait list. And the other thing I'll leave you with, and then we'll start taking questions, and I see that the chat is blowing up with questions, so we're going to get to that. is funding for the arts. That's always been something that's been very important to me. But you all know so many businesses and industries struggled during COVID, but none like the arts. So many arts and culture programs were first to close during the pandemic because they were based on live performances with big groups of people indoors and the air conditioning. They were first to close and last to reopen. So we called for a full investment in arts and culture grants issued by the Division of Cultural Affairs. And while that amendment was also rejected, our amendment actually yielded an additional, I believe, yes, it was an additional $11 million in investments to arts and culture grants. That means that we were able to secure $26.7 million in arts and culture grants for over 600 mostly non-for-profit arts and culture groups around the state, which are a huge, huge economic driver for Florida. It's a $4 billion industry. And that ended up being $2 million that we brought back just to Orange County alone for those arts and culture grants, which also include museums and other preservation projects as well, which were desperately needed. So I'm just so, I'm proud of that work. And I know that that's kind of just a silver lining from what was a really tough session. But I want to start looking at questions, David, if that's okay, because while I could go on all day, I could probably talk for 90 minutes about all the different bills that happened during session. I know I missed a lot of them, but there was so much that happened. So let me start looking through the chat. But David, if there's something that you want to throw in front of me first, feel free to do that while I catch up here.
Yeah, please do. I won't take all of your attention, so focus on that. And I just will mention for the group here, we are somewhat familiar with the Florida High School Athletic Association, in particular, since they have tried hard to keep high school sports secular. In fact, refused to allow, I think or at least one or two of the schools that were competing. It was two Christian schools that made it to the finals in Orlando, and I think it was December 2014, maybe 15. And they were told, no, this is I'm paraphrasing, we're a quasi-governmental organization. You can't have the microphone for a prayer. This is a school event. And so we've been following that case, and there's been a lot of briefs filed, and it's been going on for years. I'm sure a lot of money's been spent and wasted. And the Florida High School Athletic Association has been really good about maintaining their secular roots. So that's something that we're very familiar with. And regarding the moment of silence bill, if it would have been secular lawmakers that would have suggested this, I might believe it. But Randy Fine is the one who filed this bill originally in January. And his statement the other day on social media, I don't know what platform it was because I saw it all over the place as an image. He said, now we can pray in school. And then the governor goes to a Jewish synagogue, or a school rather, to announce this secular opportunity. And he says, now we can pray in school. It's amazing that we have to have this conversation. But when you think about all of the stuff that's happened in Florida and in the US in the last 4 years, it's not that amazing. This is just a status quo. It's really unfortunate. But we appreciate your advocacy, Carlos. You're always, really focusing on secularism, separation between church and state. And we want to continue to help you do that. So keep in touch with us on all those issues. And did you find something you want to mention? Because we are compiling questions as well, but you hit the ones you like.
So thank you. And I'm looking at them one at a time. And first I see Steve. What's up, Steve? How are you doing? Good to hear from you. Steve has a question about how local supervisors of elections, how do they allocate where their voting machines go? The reason for asking is that there always seem to be fewer voting machines and longer voting lines in the low-income communities. I think that they should be by the number of people in the district. So that it's a good question, Steve. My understanding is that the voting machine, every supervisor of elections, all 67 counties, they have their own assets and their own inventory of voting machines. And when we spend a lot of time and money, I suppose, vetting candidates for local supervisor of elections, because we know those are elected positions, we ask them about their values. We ask them about, how they're going to use these assets? Are they going to use more resources to buy more voting machines? Where are they going to put those voting machines? This is why it's important to know your candidates. So that's a long way of me saying my understanding is it is the local supervisor of elections who determines where those voting machines are going to go. Now, is there a floor on statutory requirements for a number of voting machines in each precinct? I have to assume that there's at least a floor, but I know that supervisors of elections have some discretion in where they place those voting machines. So that's a very specific question, and I can certainly look into it more. But if you're seeing a trend somewhere specifically in a specific county where perhaps there's a lack of appropriate voting machines in certain locations, then I think that's something that we should try to engage with our local supervisor of elections on. But it's also an important reason why the state has an obligation to ensure that we fund our local supervisors of elections so that they have the resources they need to buy enough voting machines. But also, the state has an obligation to invest in updating those machines, repairing those machines, making sure they're the most technologically advanced equipment that we can use. And also, it's important that the state doesn't pass elections laws that are unfunded mandates. Because if we pass laws that are unfunded mandates on our local supervisors of elections, they have to expend more resources to comply with new voting laws, and they don't have those resources to spend on voting machines. Senate Bill 90 is a great example. It's an unfunded mandate. What is the unfunded mandate? Senate Bill 90 says that supervisors of elections must have a hired person supervising the drop box, the vote by mail drop box that we all use to, put our vote by mail ballots if we weren't using the normal post office, the normal mail. They have to have someone hired there watching it at all times. Sounds reasonable, I guess, but I actually don't think it's reasonable, and I'll explain that why in a moment. But it's an unfunded mandate. They basically said, hey, do you have a 24-hour drop box? Is it surveilled by a video camera? That's not enough. You need a live person watching it. So that means they have to hire this person. That means that now all of the drop boxes have to be monitored at all times by a live person, which costs money, and they didn't provide those supervisors of elections with the money. Now, why do I think it's kind of unreasonable to make sure that it's always being watched by a live person? Because when the supervisors of elections receive vote by mail ballots, regardless of whether someone was watching them drop it in the box or not, when those ballots are opened, they're reviewed and they are going through a process where it's confirmed that they're legitimate ballots. What difference does it make how the ballot was dropped in the vote? But what difference does it make if someone watched them put it in? Why do you have to watch them put it in the box? If all four corners of the vote by mail ballot are legitimate, they check out, it's a valid voter, the signatures match, what difference does it make how it got there? Now, a lot of folks who don't use drop boxes, who just put their vote by mail ballot in the blue mailbox at the post office, is someone monitoring that post office box? Is someone watching that blue mailbox to make sure that the person dropping it off is the person, has the right ID, and that no one's watching it. So what's the difference? A drop box is a mailbox. It's the same thing as long as it's a legit ballot. Who cares? I digress. I'm sorry. I feel like I just went on a rant there.
That's funny. I wanted to mention, though, I as a partisan poll watcher and as a candidate poll watcher, I've been in Seminole County for doing that a couple times. And, we have voting machines, but in Seminole, it's just one machine, right? Because you go to a pop-up stand and mark your ballot, and then you put it into a machine. So I think your question really is good, Steve, but I think it has also to do with the number of places where you can stand and vote more than it does the actual ballot counter. And I'm not sure how all counties work, but I think that's really relevant. You got another one there, Carlos?
I see another question here from Brando. So the question says, there will be a tax. Okay, there will be a tax on science education at some point in the near future, namely the teaching of evolution and climate change. When that happens, what realistically can we do to fight back? The attacks I listed above were all very much successful. I think they're talking about critical race theory and things of that nature. I mean, you have a point. The point being that, what is happening and what is being taught in our public schools, the facts, like if you look at critical race theory as an example, which, by the way, for the record, critical race theory is not taught in K-12 public schools. If someone is worried about their child being taught critical race theory in school, then their child is actually a graduate student. They are not in a K-12 public school. So that let's just set the record straight there. Governor DeSantis thinks that teaching about some ugly history in the United States, which we can, by the way, we can change and do better and move towards more freedom and equality for every person. The governor says that that's divisive, and so he's trying to ban something from schools that doesn't even exist. So the next logical step is banning the teaching of evolution, banning the teaching of climate change. We've seen the debate around creationism versus evolution for our public schools. So do I worry if there's, the next fight is going to be let's ban teaching climate change in our schools? I mean, it's not a far-fetched idea. What can we do to push back against it? Continue. It might sound like a cheesy answer, but continue participating in groups like Central Florida Freethought, because being engaged and being civically conscious about what's going on and being active in the community to educate others about why not teaching about climate change in schools is a bad thing is actually how we disrupt those types of movements, is by having more conversations, being active, and certainly electing folks who understand that and agree, because it's the truth that those things need to be taught in schools.
It's worth mentioning that the questioner there, Brandon Haught, it's a high school teacher in Volusia, wrote the book on the fight to get creationism into public schools and how it's been kept out for the most part. But he talks about that in his book, and he's right there with the Florida Citizens for Science, who actually does more than the CFFC. So I want to put a plug in for the Florida Citizens for Science for those of you interested in participating in that group.
100%. And then I also see, I think Steve has another question. I assume the best way is to replace Republicans with Democrats in elected office. Maybe the best way is to register more Dems and even provide transportation to the polls, eliminate gerrymandering. So gerrymandering is already prohibited in the state constitution because in 2010, voters, many of them, you were many of those voters who voted to pass fair districts, which is a constitutional prohibition on gerrymandering in Florida. But now we have a super conservative Florida Supreme Court. When Governor DeSantis was elected, he had the opportunity to appoint 3 new Florida Supreme Court justices. And of course, that he appointed very conservative justices that aligned with his point of view. And that actually transformed the Florida Supreme Court from a left-leaning court being in the majority to now a super conservative Florida Supreme Court. What does that have to do with redistricting? Well, I fear, or gerrymandering, what I fear is that in this next legislative session, which is when we will be drawing new maps, as we are required to do every 10 years. Every 10 years is when we redistrict for the Florida House maps, the Florida Senate maps, and of course the congressional maps for Florida. And my fear is that they will be gerrymandered. They will be drawn in a way to favor the Republican Party and particular Republican candidates for office, and that the newly formed conservative Florida Supreme Court will ignore their obligation to enforce the Fair Districts constitutional amendment and uphold whatever the Republicans pass through. How can we beat back against that? We have to be ready to really engage in a public accountability battle to ensure that the Florida legislature in this next legislative session draw fair maps, so that obviously we're respecting the Florida Constitution as it relates to fair districts.
Wouldn't fair maps actually look a lot different than we have now? So the way they did it right was like the whole thing is turned upside down. And I know that won't happen because they don't want to give up, as badly as they want to give up your seat to someone else, Carlos, they don't want to give up the ones that they have a steady hand on. So great question. I want to mention one that was asked before the event by Gary in our meetup group. So he says, I'll summarize, the Florida legislative session seems short to him. Has there been a move or even conversation about changing that and making it longer? And I'll add from myself, is that a good thing or a bad thing to make it longer?
Right. Be careful what you wish for. Well, actually, it's a good question because, listen, we have a state of 21 million people. 21 million people live in Florida, and we got a lot of problems in our state that need to be resolved, that need to be addressed. And to be fair, you can't really address all of the problems that come around in a calendar year or that linger and continue year to year. You can't really address all of those problems in a 60-day legislative session. And it looks like lawmakers aren't really trying to address them either. They're, chasing boogeymen and banning trans kids from team sports and, totally rewriting our elections laws in Florida, even though we had no problems in 2020. So yeah, I feel like we need more time to address the many concerns that Floridians have, but to the point of being careful what you wish for, I'm kind of worried in this current political environment what giving this legislature more time would look like. I think it would give them more time to take a wrecking ball to the state, honestly. Right now, the 60 days is a constitutional mandate. So thinking of what a solution would be to that, I don't know that it's a solution that could very easily be addressed because I do believe it would require changing the Constitution, which calls for 60 days, if we wanted to call it for more, which means, as you know, it is now rather difficult thanks to an even newer law that we passed this session that makes it harder to fundraise for petition gathering for a constitutional amendment. It is a challenge to change the Constitution in the state of Florida, not only because voters have to approve it with a 60% majority, but because you have to collect 800,000 valid signatures, and there's a lot of obstacles in the way of that. But there's a new initiative actually that was just announced recently that I still need to review a lot of the details to see what the language looks like. But the Florida Realtors are now backing a new constitutional amendment effort that they are seeking to force the legislature's hand to require them to use the dock stamp taxes, which fund the Sadowski Fund in Florida, to be used for affordable housing. That's what it was intended to do. But for those of you who follow, year after year, we go to the Florida legislature and they sweep the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is supposed to be spent on affordable housing, and they take the money and they use it to spend on other things not related to affordable housing, and people are quite sick of it. So I think I'd be inclined probably to support something like that so that we can force the legislature's hand.
Did you say, Carlos, that there's a mandated 60-day or mandated maximum or mandated minimum 60 days?
60-day, they mandate that the regular session be 60 days, that's the default.
Okay.
I'd have to look at the language again to refamiliarize myself with it. Now, don't get me wrong, the Florida legislature, at least the leadership and the governor, they don't have to change the Constitution to extend the amount of time that we're there year after year. They can't make it permanent, but the governor has the power, just like the Senate president and the Speaker of the House have the individual legislative power to basically sign a letter on letterhead that declares either an extension of the 60-day legislative session or creating a special session to deal with a specific issue, like we just did. Actually, we finished the regular session this year on time, and then days later it was announced, although we knew it was coming, it was announced that they were going to have a special legislative session to ratify the Seminole Compact that was negotiated with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. You know that really just deals with gaming and gambling, because gambling in Florida only happens, as far as casino-style gambling, only happens on the tribal lands, on the tribal reservation, and the rules around what the tax rate is and what types of games they're allowed to have, and all of this are negotiated in what we call the compact, which has to be ratified by the Florida legislature.
And can you remind us why and when the session meets early? It meets early next year, right? And is that
right
election year? What's the reasoning?
So even though we're in session for 60 days, that's the actual session, we do have what we call interim committee weeks, which is basically like a warm up for session. It's kind of the same as session because we have committees, we hear bills, we vote on bills, we debate on bills during committee weeks, and we normally have 8 or 9 weeks of committee before session starts. Now the calendar changes every year. On an election year, which is 2022 coming up, the session starts early. So session in the 2022 legislative year will begin at the beginning of January, and it will end right at the beginning of March, as opposed to this year, which is when it started in March and ended at the end of April. And one of the reasons they do that is to allow for lawmakers to come back to their districts and start campaigning really during an election year. But committee will start for us in September. We will return to Tallahassee in September. We'll be there probably for 2 weeks in September, two weeks in October, I think a couple weeks in November, and 1 in December doing pre-session work. And then session begins in January.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll note that Brando Haughty, as he has claimed himself.
I'm sorry, I called him. It said Brando there, and I'm like, I don't know if that's a typo. So I was like, I don't.
He's either playing around or failed to keep himself secret. One or the other. I want to point out his reminder to you there, but also I'll connect you and him via email afterwards, because I think he's a voice that you need to be listening to, or at least make sure your staff is tuned into for referencing good information.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Brandon.
You bet. I just want to mention, we are in Pride Month right now, and honestly, we have 2 Pride Months here in Florida, June and October. But talk to us about the 5-year, kind of remembrances that we've had in this last week. I know you've been a big part of that because of your advocacy and the important work that you did for Equality Florida, even before you went to the legislature. And I credit, and you probably do as well, your work with Equality Florida to help you make yourself as a better lawmaker in that time. So talk a little bit about Pulse and about Pride and what this month has meant to you and to the work that you've done in the legislature and in Central Florida, if you could.
Thank you for that question, David. Yeah, this month is LGBTQ Pride. Well, first of all, I want to address something that happened yesterday. So yesterday, unfortunately, there was a terrible tragedy down in Wilton Manors during Wilton Manors Pride where someone drove their vehicle into the crowd at Pride Parade, and unfortunately one person was killed. All accounts so far appear to suggest that this was accidental, but I do want to emphasize appear to suggest. Law enforcement is still looking into the matter, and they've not really made a declaration one way or another. But either way, someone lost their life, and it was really tragic, and I'm really saddened by that. And I just kind of want to share my love and support for those folks that were impacted yesterday at Wilton Manors Pride. It is Pride Month, and for me, I'll just say, as a gay man, Pride Month for me is about being open and authentic, and being open and authentic actually matters, because I feel like the way the LGBTQ community has been able to find success in our movement for civil rights and equality is by telling our stories and living our lives out loud. Most of you have either seen or met my husband, Jerick, who I love very much. We have a very public life, and I'm proud of that. And a lot of that, not just during Pride Month, has to do with the fact that we know as leaders in the community that it's very important for our relationship to be a visible relationship, because LGBTQ young people need role models. They do. When I was in high school, I graduated from high school in 1999. I didn't know who Harvey Milk was. I didn't have any gay role models. And having LGBTQ role models is so important for LGBTQ youth. And it's also really important for adults too. I mean, there are folks who will never be on our side, right? They will never accept LGBTQ people. They will always be bigots. They will always be homophobes. They will always be transphobes. And there's nothing that you can do to change that, right? But then there's folks that are in this movable middle of folks who just don't understand the LGBTQ community, who can be educated, who can be familiarized with who we are and that we're just normal people, right? And I think that that visibility really makes a difference with those individuals. Now, Orlando has always been great. Orlando, I was asked this so much last week during the Pulse Remembrance activities. Wasn't Orlando a really accepting place for LGBTQ people before Pulse? Yes, we were. I mean, did we have room for improvement? Absolutely. But the way we saw this community after Pulse really doubled down in support of love and acceptance and support for LGBTQ people, I think is really amazing. We still have a lot of work to do. But one question I was asked over and over last week, which I really had to take time to think about and provide an honest answer, was what have we accomplished since this terrible tragedy at Pulse nightclub that took 49 lives? Because we can get frustrated, right? We can see what Governor DeSantis is doing when he banned trans kids from sports, and when he vetoed funding for the Pulse Resiliency Center at the LGBTQ Center of Orlando, which was a heartless, cruel, and homophobic act. And he vetoed funding for LGBTQ homeless youth at the Zebra Coalition. You see this and you're just like, how have we improved since Pulse? It seems like things have gotten worse. I don't think they've gotten worse. What is happening in our movement is what's happened in similar movements, which is whenever we make progress, even if the progress is baby steps, or sometimes they're giant leaps forward, when we make that progress, we always face a backlash. And it's about steps forward and steps backward. I think that when we think of progress, we're like, well, we wanted progress overnight, but instead really what's happening is we're getting progress over time. What is that progress? Well, since Pulse, we saw that the U.S. Supreme Court in one of their recent decisions last summer, said that they will interpret the U.S. Civil Rights Act to include LGBTQ people in employment, that they cannot be discriminated against in employment. That was a huge step forward. But then, Trump banned trans people from serving in the military, and he rolled back all these protections. And then Biden was elected, and then Biden canceled Trump's ban on trans people serving in the military. And Biden signed a sweeping executive order in his first week as president that had more LGBTQ protections than any executive order we've seen in the history of the United States from a president. So now from that progress, we're now seeing backlash that is coming in the form of Governor Ron DeSantis and his hatred towards our community. So the only way that we ensure that we have more steps forward than steps backward is we have to keep telling our stories. We have to keep living our lives out loud, and we have to remain committed to that movement for equality. Same on gun safety and gun control. Like, do I feel we've made progress on gun safety since Pulse? Yes, because Florida passed a law after Parkland that created the red flag law that says that a judge can revoke someone's firearm if they are a threat to themselves or someone else. We raised the age from 18 to 21 to purchase a firearm in Florida, but also in that same bill, we armed teachers. So we had 2 steps forward and a step backward. And so we just have to conceptualize or reconceptualize what we believe, what we thought progress was going to be in our minds was something that was, overnight. And that's just not the case. It's a series of steps forward and some steps backward. And we have to understand that progress is going to come over time and not overnight.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I had another question that popped into my my feed here. As we close out, can you talk just briefly about kind of certainly LGBTQ demographic overlaps the atheist, agnostic, skeptic demographic greatly, more so than the average community member. But what about being openly agnostic or non-religious? How's that been for you? Because I think that weighs heavily on the mind of everybody here, as we've had, people on this call who have been candidates for office and others who have just said, you know what, I can't even come out at work. So how's that gone for you in the last few years? And I know you don't run around waving that flag, you have other flags to wave, but we do hear you talk about you're open that way as well. But has that been an issue in campaigning or in life in general?
And I'm glad you asked that, David, because when I've been invited to speak at national forums as a free thinker, as someone who identifies as agnostic, I've gotten the same question. So it has not been a problem for me, but even if it has not been a problem for me as an elected official, meaning that, I've not lost like large swaths of support because I identify as agnostic, that doesn't mean that it, has not been an obstacle for others. To your point, David, I don't know how many of my constituents know I'm agnostic. I think that there's also an assumption based on the fact that I'm LGBTQ, because listen, it is true that there are so many people in the LGBTQ community, and more that are really committed persons of faith. They are. My husband is actually very, very spiritual. A lot of people think he's Buddhist. He's not Buddhist, but he identifies with so many different religions and different parts of people's religions that and he believes that there's a higher being that's possibly within all of us. He tells it better than I do. And actually he was part of this forum during last week's Pulse Remembrance activities, talking about LGBTQ identities and faith. And how they intersect and how they work well with one another and how sometimes they don't. But I can tell you still in answer to your question, I've not encountered a lot of challenges in Tallahassee simply because I identify as agnostic. I think I've just encountered challenges there because I'm a member of the minority party who's vocal.
No, I appreciate that. No, I was there at that panel, and we had a representative from the atheist community, Kelly Parkin, who you know as well. And it was nice to see her represented on stage. And that was a fantastic event. And we were happy to see you in the audience, and we knew you'd be there. It was great. Yeah.
And I was waving to you from far away, David. And then, of course, Jocelyn came up for the second panel, and she did a great job.
It's great. So listen, I think we've hit up against the top of the hour, and we know how valuable your time is, and we also know how glad you are to be with us. But it's so much. There's so much importance to the work that you do, and we realize that for having banged your head up against the wall in Tallahassee, it looks fine. Just let me make your head looks fine, even though I know the face palms probably don't help. The eye rolls are good exercise. And we will come and see you next year in Tallahassee. I promise to make it up. Hopefully you'll be available. But listen, keep up the fight, keep up the hard work, keep us in your mind and in your heart, and we'll do the same on this end. Okay.
Thank you, David, and thank you to everyone who joined us. You know that you can always reach me either by calling my office or reaching out to me on social media. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Carlos G. Smith, or on Facebook. And I look forward to seeing y'all out on the streets.
Thanks so much, Carlos. Bye-bye now.
Take care.
All right, so before we let everyone else go, several upcoming events to let you know about. First, our next event, that's July 18th, 3 p.m. right here on Zoom for at least a couple more months. That will be our friend and ally, David Tamayo from the Hispanic American Freethinkers. We host him in person a few years ago for a couple of local events. And I spent the weekend down here. It'll be good to check back in with him and the HAFRE group. That's the Hispanic American Freethinkers. So I want to mention a lot of things here in the next couple of minutes, but out of respect for your time, I'll be brief and try not to be too fast. If you have to go, that's fine. We're recording this and you can catch up, but we got some exciting things that are happening as we start to move out of the COVID era. CFFC is sponsoring a scholarship for a $1,000 scholarship for Florida secular college students. So that's through the Secular Student Alliance. And if you have time to put those in the chat, I'd appreciate it. But if not, that's okay. I know we've got a shotgun happening here with some ideas. We're not fundraising on this, but if that's an important thing to you, feel free to go to our support page. Let us know that you'd like to support that scholarship, and we're sure that those funds will be earmarked for this year or future years where we plan to expand that. So CFFC scholarship the first time this year. But the reason we're not fundraising is because we have a fundraising push coming up in the next few weeks for our first billboards. All right, so we're about to announce, and I'm not officially announcing it here, so don't tell everybody. We're going to put a couple of billboards up, hopefully 2 in August or September, right before we start to meet back again in person. So if billboards are something that you're passionate about, I don't want to spoil the design idea at this point, but I will tell you it is a CFFC billboard, and we will have it up hopefully in the next couple of months. So look for more information on that, and we'd love for you to have your support in making that a reality as well. Okay, we're marching in Pride Parade, which, as I mentioned when we were talking to Carlos, October is also kind of a Pride month for us because we have enough sense to know that Pride is probably better celebrated in October in Florida. So on October 9th, we will march in the Pride Parade, and we will also be tabling for the first time this year. So we got in early, we got a table booked, and we are going to have our Pride banner out, and we will be dressed up, dressed down, dressed out, however you want to come to Pride and march with us. Mark your calendars, October 9th. It'll be an awesome time. It always is. It's not a short walk, it's a medium walk. It's a great pace, and it's a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you with us. Much more on that, but you can go ahead and mark the 9th of October for your calendar. So want to mention, as I did last month, Free Flow is back on again. This is an event of the Florida Humanist Association. It will be at the Marriott Orlando Airport Lakeside on March 4th, 5th, and 6th. If you want to see kind of what's growing on the webpage, mark your calendar to check back at Free Flow. That's FREEFLO.org on a regular basis. We're starting to populate that with speakers. We'll get a schedule in there. Not going to ask you to book your hotel room yet, but we do have that on there as well. So more information on Free Flow coming up. Out of all the speakers we've asked to participate, almost all of them have booked. Dr. Don Lincoln will be there. Seth Andrews will be there. Mandisa Thomas will be there. And so many more. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. I know that most of you know that event is fantastic. So look for that. We're continuing our online social events in person online and in person for the next few months. We'll probably start phasing out the social events because we can't make those events hybrid. We can do, only online or only in-person social events, but you can't have a camera at the coffee shop and film the conversation and make it inclusive. But we will figure out ways to do hybrid events as much as possible, considering that some of you aren't local. But a few key meetups in July to mention. We have 2 secular invocations. And if you don't know what that is, go to cflfreethought.org/invocations. 2 of those coming up in DeLand in July 6th and Maitland on the 26th. And we will be going to dinner afterwards at both of those events. Those are evening events. We'll be at the City Hall for like 10 minutes, and then we'll go and grab a bite to eat and a drink. Also, July 21st in Longwood, we have an escape room. Our event host for the Longwood Freethought Cafe is going to help us with an escape room hosting on July 21st. Now, it's a little tricky because we don't know how many people are going to be there. There are 2 rooms. We will fill up the first room, and then we'll fill up the second room. And we hope to fill up both rooms and kind of max it out with CFFC people, not because we don't like other people, but because we'd rather hang out with one another. That's why we hang out together. You need to go and check out the meetup, book your room, okay, on the website of the company. I don't have the link, but if you can put that in the chat, that would be great. Check meetup, book your room, pay for your room, and then also RSVP. You can't just RSVP on Meetup. You have to book your room or you won't get in. And we'd love for you to also RSVP on Meetup, or just message us and let us know you're coming so we can, kind of know who's going to be there and know to look out for you. But again, register and go to the Meetup and RSVP, and you'll be reminded there on the Meetup how to do that. Secular women's dinners are back in full swing. I think we've got at least 2 every month, seeming to happen on a Sunday. So keep that in mind. And then last event to mention here is August 1st. There will be a Pride themed paint event from 3 to 5:30, and that's going to be at the Oviedo Mall. I forgot the name of the location. If you want to come off mute and mention that, that'll be fine. But you can find that on Meetup, and we will go to Oviedo Brewing after that. So find out about all. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm putting the link to the event. It's actually at the Oviedo Mall. It's Calliope Street.
Calliope, that's right.
Calliope Street, yes.
Yep.
And I put the link to the event. It's a lot of fun, and you don't have to do the picture exactly as it is. So please be aware. And I'll be posting that as soon as we get a final draft. It's going to be Pulse themed, and we'll have it up probably in the next few days.
Yeah, we've been to that place before. It's been a lot of fun for the paint nights. So again, find out how to join us, find out how to join us in person or here on Zoom at meetup.com/CFL Freethought. If you want upcoming activity emails, sign up at tinyurl.com. That's tinyurl.com/CFFC newsletter. And if you need help connecting, just reach out and let us know. We want to be as accessible as possible. Unfortunately, we can't call you whenever we have new events. You have to sign up in one way or another, but we'd love to help you, fill you in on some details. If you have any suggestions for types of events that we might consider, we're ramping up quickly. We can't do everything, but we want to know what you're interested in. If you've got some ideas on how to get us together, whether it's volunteerism, social events, speakers that you'd like to see, you can message us in any number of ways, including via email at info@cflfreethought.org. And of course, our website is cflfreethought.org. With that, we'll let you get back to your weekend, and we'll see you all in person very soon.